What if the Bible was a blueprint on how to live a better existence? What if the Bible was actually a map to living a more abundant and fulfilling life? I know that this probably triggers some of you that are prosperity gospelists, but in this video I want to talk about some Bible-based business principles, and they're pretty self-evident to me. Well, I wanted to share them with you. I've been inspired to kind of go down and see the Bible differently just from Myron Golden, who helped me shift my whole perspective on it in 2023. If I'm honest with myself, if I'm honest with you, I used to look at it as, this giant guy on the anthill that's living in the clouds telling us what to do and how to live life. And just for no rhyme or reason, it was like, do these things or get out. And so my perspective has changed to be like, okay, like what if this is like the blueprint or the map towards living a more fulfilling existence and having a more successful, abundant life, not just in terms of financially, but also in our relationships. But in this video, I'm going to talk about it from a business, from an entrepreneurial standpoint. So number one, I've been putting off making this video for a long time. I think mostly because my own life is a train wreck, and I felt like I needed to be perfect, completely sinless, and have everything together in order to speak on this topic. And I had a very long conversation with a friend last night that made me realize that was a really selfish approach, but not just selfish, but also ridiculous. Because I don't think that there will be a day that goes by from now to the day that I die where I'm without sin or without some kind of problems of some sort. So I was being selfish by letting my ego prevent me from sharing this, and I'm never going to be perfect. I'm working on it. I'm a work in progress, but this is why I'm like, you know what? There's no better time than now. So I want to share these three things with you, and I have a couple of stories that I'm going to lean on to talk about these principles. So the first one is the idea of leveraging. In the story of the talents, right? So the master gives each of these servants like a different amount of money. He goes away and then he comes back, and they all invest it to some extent. And so I like this model because at the very end, I believe it's Matthew 25 verses 26. Matthew 25 verse 26, it's a really good example of leveraging, right? He says, he's talking to the one that buried it in the ground and basically didn't do anything with the money. And he's like, the servant is like, well, I knew you're a man that, plants seeds where you haven't sown and all this stuff. And it really is an example of leveraging, right? You're using your leverage to gain a yield in crops or whatever. And he's saying like, the servant is saying to the master, I know that you leverage yourself. And he's like kind of using it in a negative way to say, that's why I just buried it in the ground. I knew you were going to be mad, whatever. And so the story of talents to me is the idea of figuring out how to get leverage in your business, figuring out how to extend your impact and your reach beyond just a ratio of 1 to 1. A good example of this could be like Daniel Priestley, and when one of his presentations that I was recently out, he talks about how so many coaches and people feel such a burden to create every product themselves, right? But in my coaching program, I work with people to come up with a library that's a library of books, whether it's on Audible or whether they're physical books, that I fold into my coaching package to make sure that they have the materials that are going to not only speak to them, but help them with where they are. And so there's this signature package of books that I have for them that's relevant to them. I don't have to go and write all of those books. I'm leveraging those books as a part of my offer. And so leveraging in the story of talents to me is it's a very clear and good example. The second one, this is a little bit less traditional, but it's been on my mind a lot, so I'm going to share it with you guys. I was recently watching The Chosen, and if you watch that video, I think that the particular episode where they have the woman that touches Jesus's robe or whatever, it's a really good example of belief before blessing. She believed that if she touched the robe, that she would be healed of her ailment that she had. And I think a lot of times that we want the blessing before we believe. We want to be a bodybuilder before we start going to the gym. We want to know how it's going to turn out before we start working on it. And that's just not the world that we live in. And so it requires belief. It requires stepping out in faith before doing a lot of the different things. It requires you launching the business before customers just show up. Belief before blessing. And I think that's a great example. So, and the last one is abundance. And I know this triggers a lot of people that go into prosperity gospel mode and start freaking out. But before you freak out, I just want to point out two things. So the story of the fishes and the loaves being multiplied is a really interesting one. because number one, it happens at least twice that it's written about in the Bible. A lot of people just think it happened once. And the thing that's interesting about it is they started out not just like that this multiplication of like a couple of fish and a couple pieces of bread happened, but it's always like in both scenarios, there was left over at the end. Why was there left over? It's not like they had refrigerators and coolers to go put the stuff in or whatever. To me, I look at that and I'm like, when God shows up, there's always abundance. There's always enough. Another good example is, I forget the verse or where it's from, but it's like stamped down and overflowing, right? It's like when you give to other people, I think it was in the context of giving, but it's like it'll be stamped, you'll receive in return, stamped down and overflowing. There's always a sense of abundance. Going to the Garden of Eden, why is gold mentioned in the Garden of Eden? The gold of this land is good. Like why if there's two people, nothing's for sale, and they're husband and wife, like why does gold need to be there? I think abundance is a piece of what we were designed for. And that's not to say that like that just means money. But anyway, a lot of this came up from a conversation that I had with a friend that I went to dinner with last night, and his business is on a roller coaster. And the reason I'm telling this story is because once you have these things in your head and you see them in the Bible, and these are just 3 examples that I've seen, you'll have your own for you. But I realized he was talking to me about a product he recently launched, and one of the products was highly leveraged, and it was like totally stepping out in faith. It was like an unknown market, and his business has been a roller coaster, and he's trying these 2 new products and as kind of moonshots. One of them he did a ton of research on, and it seemed to support that like there's a market for this thing. The other, it was like a novel product. No one else is doing anything like it, and I actually think it's going to change the trajectory of his business. But his beliefs from seeing these things in the Bible and looking at these as business principles came out in his actions and how he developed and designed and marketed these 2 products. And so I think when you're reading not just the Bible, but any book, but specifically the Bible, I think you can find these business principles or concepts that are really helpful to implement in your business. So obviously Myron Golden talks about these a lot. I encourage you to go watch videos from him and see what he has to say on them. But these were 3 that I wanted to share with you guys. And I hope that they bless you. I hope they change the way you think. And I'll see you guys in the next one.